Officer as the Senior Human Factor Investigator to the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. In his role, he modernized the TSB's approach to understanding the influence of fatigue on human performance, accidents, and incidents. Clinton wrote a TSB guide to investigating sleep-related fatigue. He has also been a professor of psychology, a technical director of the Royal Ottawa Hospital Sleep Disorder Center. When he is a frequent media interviewer, he has appeared on respected news programs such as Global TV's 16:9, CBC's News Network, and CBC's The National. Please welcome Clinton McGurk.
Thank you. So the only thing I'm going to add to that introduction is I didn't produce the TSB guide on my own. Missy's team did most of the editing and actually pushed it out the door finally. So it was a community effort there. What I'd like to do is introduce the idea of more of a technical solution for managing fatigue, and talk about how you can use some solutions to model fatigue and one method of incorporating the strategy or the technique into your FRMS. I'll show you what I do when I'm asked to help out building up an FRMS and incorporate a modeling strategy. What I want to do first, though, is measure your fatigue. So if you've got a pen handy and maybe the nice notepad that Alex's team gave you, follow along. I'm going to read out 8 statements. I'll give you a bit of extra information about the statements. And what I want you to do is put yourself in that situation and think back to how you would respond or how you would react or how you would feel in each of those situations. But don't do it as right now, not how you're feeling right now, because you may or may not be more fatigued or less fatigued than usual. So average that situation out across the last month or so. And if on average in that situation you'd feel a certain way, rate it that way. Okay? The way you're going to rate it is from 0 to 3. 0 would be, in that particular situation, there's absolutely no chance you'd doze off. All the way up to 3. So remember Missy said fatigue has a spectrum from wide awake, fully alert, hard to fall asleep, all the way to the other end where you can hardly stay awake. You're experiencing microsleeps or state instability. That's number 3. Okay, so first situation, sitting down and reading. But you're not reading anything terribly engaging. We're all safety people here. You can only read so much safety information. So here's yet another safety manual you have to read. What would the likelihood of falling asleep in that situation be? 0, 1, 2, or 3. Next situation, sitting down and watching TV. Now when you watch TV, you're normally in someplace comfortable. At home, at a friend's house. So if other people are there and they see you falling asleep, see your head bobbing, and they kind of chuckle at you, who cares? You know, they're your friends. You don't really care if they're laughing at you. All right? Contrast that now with falling asleep in a public place. So if we catch you falling asleep here, some of us are strangers and we laugh at you, it's a little bit more embarrassing. It's a little less likely to fall asleep. Even so, what's the likelihood there? Okay? Next situation. You're a passenger in a car, you've been driving down a quiet rural roadway for about an hour, haven't taken a break yet. Your passenger In research world, you used to have to tape a whole bunch of electrodes and sensors all over a person. They'd come in, they'd lie down, and then you'd lie there for 8 hours, and you'd have somebody like me staring at you for 8 hours watching. A little bit score 7.5, 8, somewhere around there. Again, that doesn't mean that you're doing well. Where we really like to see people is 9 and above. I mean, sorry, 1 to 6. I've been teaching for 2 days. They've been up late. I'm fatigued. Okay. Where we don't like to see people is 9 and up. Where we like to see people is the 1 to 6 range. I'm going to score here, I guess. Okay, so there's how you actually measure it. Fatigue modeling doesn't measure fatigue. It models it out, it predicts it, it estimates it. Because you're not monitoring brain waves. You're not having people fill out a paper and pen questionnaire and giving you a proxy measure of fatigue. So it's really just an estimation of fatigue or a prediction of fatigue. The way modeling started was many, many years ago. So back in the 60s, 70s, we were learning all the interesting things about, behavioral things about fatigue and sleep. We were learning about the sleep stage. We were learning how much sleep people actually need. We were learning about if they don't get the sleep they need, what then happens. We then realized that there's, if you put all these factors together, Missy talked about 6 fatigue risk factors. You put all those 6 fatigue risk factors together, you get a pretty good idea whether or not somebody's fatigued or not. So people thought, well, maybe there's a way we can use those to sort of electronically or digitally predict when people are fatigued. So they started with theories around first how people become fatigued. So there's a variety of different theories out there. There's things like the Ackersted's 3-process theory. Most of them combine some calculation or some combination of decreased sleep quality or decreased sleep quantity, and some circadian rhythm factors in there to come up with a theory of why people are fatigued. The theories then started getting translated into journal articles, research. So they'd come up with a theory, then they test it. Okay, well, if the theory is correct, if we manipulate these variables, we should see that people are fatigued. And they did see that. So they started publishing those articles in the late 70s, 80s, and some of them still get published today, but there's not a lot of new theories around why we become fatigued. If you look at the TC guidance material, Missy gave you a website for it. I believe they call it the FRMS toolkit or FRMS a working kit or something like that. They have essentially a theory embedded in what they call their individual fatigue likelihood score. That theory is based on, if you don't get enough sleep in the recent history, so TSB and the model that I use, you don't get enough, you have acute sleep disruption. You don't get enough sleep in a longer term, so sleep debt or chronic sleep disruption. And you're awake for a long period of time, so the continuous wakefulness risk factor. You combine all of these things and you get an idea of how fatigued people are. That's how the theory behind TC's IFLS calculation. The theories then started getting translated into mathematical formulas, like TC's formula. This plus this equals this level of fatigue. Now you're in the realm of math. Now you can use computer programming to translate that mathematical formula into a software-based program that calculates it really quickly. So it started getting embedded into the algorithms based on the theory, started getting embedded into the software in the early 2000s. When I first started doing work with the TSB, I was lucky enough to go to an NTSB course on fatigue. And just as things turns out, one of those really lucky circumstances, I sat beside Steve Hirsch, the professor behind the safety model, safety fast model. And we started chatting, and I said, you know, what do you do? So I'm a professor, I teach fatigue and human performance stuff. Oh, that's really interesting. I said, what do you do? Well, I do fatigue stuff for the TSB. Oh, interesting. He said, do you want to take my beta version? I've translated my theory into an algorithm that's now embedded in software. You want to take this back and test it out? So we started using it at TSB, and we found for what we were looking for, it was really a really good tool. We looked at some other ones, but for what we were looking at, this really helped us. The other one we considered at the time was FADE. FADE and FAST were the first commercially available biomathematical fatigue modeling tools in Canada. That's changed now. Now what we see is that all I do is fatigue, and I cannot even keep up with all of the technological changes and modeling and software that are coming out. It's changing very, very rapidly. If you go to the App Store or the Google Play Store and you just type in fatigue calculator or sleep monitoring app, you'll get hundreds of hits, tons of them. But beware that these versions, there's very little research behind them. It's somebody's, baby. You can buy them for $1, so you get what you pay for. The only really good app that's got some science, strong science and validation behind it is Jefferson's Crew Alert. You can get the free version, the light version, or you can pay $40. $40 for an app is pretty expensive because what you're paying for is the science behind it. It's only $40 for the free version, or I mean for the pro version, and it's an app and it's a little confusing to use. The apps and the modeling tools that I'll list today are now competing with real-time technology, real-time fatigue detection technology. One of the really interesting areas of work is being done on per close, or percentage of closure. So they look at how quickly you blink, pupil dilation speeds, and when you're sitting there, just how closed your eyes get. From there, you can predict fatigue, get an estimate of fatigue. There, you're pretty close to measuring fatigue. This is a biological change that occurs when you are fatigued. The problem with these types of sort of real-time monitoring technologies is you're essentially waiting for the person to become fatigued before you do anything about it. So there's sort of a last-ditch attempt to protect somebody or your equipment or safety. They don't predict fatigue. Modeling tools do predict fatigue. So you can look in advance. How am I going to, am I doing okay now? What about the end of flight as I'm preparing for my approach? How am I going to be at that point in time? The other neat thing that is occurring now is a lot of the apps and a lot of the modeling software is being combined with really cool wearables like the Rain Bit, which I'll talk about in a bit. Fitbit's new system, it doesn't tell you if you're going to be fatigued, but it's got some really great metrics there that will help you monitor your sleep really closely. And if you think about the theories around fatigue, you can then take those metrics and kind of predict whether or not you're going to be fatigued or not. This is a really neat area that's really growing quickly. You're also seeing a lot of cloud solutions emerging. So Pulsar system, Fatigue Meter, and Fleet Insight are all cloud-based. So any updates are very, they're embedded in the software already. So you're not constantly updating software, and there's no storage issues either. And you can access it wherever you are too. Every model that I've looked at has a variety of different entry levels or maybe exit levels. Okay? So some of them you can buy a little more cheaply, and you get a basic system. Other ones, I heard a quote the other day, Jefferson's whole fleet management and logistics and scheduling sort of pairing software. Somebody got a quote for $3 million for the software package alone. So obviously me as a small consultant, I'm not going to spend $3 million on some software that will be predict fatigue. But I know that they've got other versions like Crew Alert that I can't afford. $40 is pretty easy for me to afford. I mentioned that the market is changing rapidly. You're seeing changes in pricing occurring monthly, if not more quickly. As each company sees they're losing a bit of market share, they change their offering to try and regain market share, and it's happening very, very quickly. The better the software, the more expensive it is. You're getting what you pay for, but their pricing is not based on the technical sophistication of the software, because it's not that complicated. It's more complicated than you can do in your own head, but it's not from a software perspective. It's not terribly complicated. What they price it on is the result. So you save one accident, there could be your whole company down the tubes with one accident. You save one accident, that could be $1, $2, $3 million in savings. Not all software is $1 million. Entry points are usually around $5,000 to $10,000. The other thing that is, with respect to similarities, is with respect to scientific validation, they compare most of their findings, most of their predictions on performance metrics. So one of the best metrics around to see if somebody's fatigued is what we call the Psychomotor Vigilance test. So I would have a computer screen, and I would flash, say, a yellow trapezoid type shape at you, and then I would flash a red one out. And you have to respond same or different. You monitor reaction time and accuracy of your response. Very sensitive measure to fatigue. This is what the science behind most of the modeling tools is based on. So again, it's not a measurement of fatigue per se. You're not measuring brain waves, you're not measuring eye closure. The reason that they haven't gone back and correlated it with findings from monitoring actual brain waves on people in sleep labs is because the market is changing too quickly. They don't have time to go back and do that very, very strong basic level science. But all of the models are published or based on actual peer-reviewed theories and algorithms that have got some validation, usually with some sort of performance test that I mentioned there. Now, if they are all based on the idea that we're all biologically pretty similar, we all eventually get fatigued if we mess up our sleep enough, then you'd think that the results from each model would be pretty similar, but they're not. They're different. So you pump something through, say, fast, it's going to give you a slightly different result than fade. A couple of the reasons for that are, first of all, they're based on research which is based on stats, which is based on averages, which is based on ranges. Large ranges, it depends on the ranges that people are using within the mathematics behind them. So there's always a degree of error in there based also on statistical error likelihoods. There could be errors in the mathematics that they're using to calculate fatigue. There could be errors actually in the actual software programming itself that result in the differences between the results in software packages. So knowing that the software is built on averages and there's a little bit of error you have to assume in there, it means that the conclusions that you can draw from the software, from the modeling tools, are pretty good at predicting what's going to happen to the average person within your workforce. What's going to happen exactly to me, to Alex, to Missy, is going to be not that well substantiated. Because we might not be the average person. If they are not that great for predicting an individual's risk, one of the reasons why they don't do it is because, like I said, the research is based on ranges. The daily requirement, so every 24 hours of life, you need between 6, 7, and 9 hours of sleep. That's a pretty large range in there. So the software is based on the idea that everybody needs about 8 hours of sleep. But if I need 9, it's going to underestimate the level of fatigue. If I only need 6, it's going to overestimate the level of fatigue. People also react differently to changes to sleep. So some people, if you talk to the long-haul truck drivers, they say they can stay awake for 22 hours in a row, no problem. So somehow they're biologically different from the rest of us. Not quite true. They figure, though, that they don't respond the same to sleep disruption or continuous wakefulness than the rest of us. And to some degree, that's true. Some, not truckers per se, but some people don't respond that poorly to sleep, to changes to the sleep. Some people are much more sensitive to it. I get along pretty good without 2 or 3 days of not the greatest sleep. Other people in my family don't. You don't want to be around them when they're sleeping. A little bit cranky. If your sensitivity to sleep changes is varied amongst person to person, it also means that your performance impairment due to that sleep difference or sensitivity or disruption changes as well. So some people can perform quite well, even being fatigued. The other thing that the models have a hard time incorporating is changes to sleep quality, or incorporating a finding or an input of this person slept for 8 hours. Remember, Missy said the sleep apnea was sleep 7, 8 hours, and sometimes say, I slept okay, or I slept long enough. But if you look at what's going on during their sleep, they're not getting REM sleep, they're not getting deep sleep, they're getting stage 1, stage 2. They will typically say, I sleep for 9 hours, but I'm still fatigued. The software, unfortunately, is not sophisticated yet enough to be able to incorporate slight changes in quality of people's sleep. The best they can do is, I'll show you in FAST, is that they can incorporate an estimate or an input of sleep environment quality, because there's a very strong relationship between the environment you sleep in and your sleep quality. The only way of knowing sleep quality is putting electrodes on a person's head and monitoring brainwaves. But we do know that if you put them in a hot environment, a loud environment, a very, very dry environment, that sleep quality is less, is disrupted, is poor. So they allow you to say this person slept in a bad environment, which then increases the risk of fatigue. Plus, they cannot account for sleep disorders. So there's no tab in there that said this person has sleep apnea. Change the prediction. They can't account for some of the other medical problems and sort of ingestibles that you can take in that affect your fatigue either. So one of the things you see oftentimes with caffeine is some people say, caffeine does nothing for me. I can have a glass of coffee or a cup of coffee before bed and I can still fall asleep. If you look at what's going on in that person's brainwaves, their sleep is actually disturbed. They don't get as much deep sleep. They have arousals that they don't notice. But the software can't account for that. It's not at the level of being able to predict or take individual differences into account. So if it's got those limitations, it means that a couple of the good uses for it are for, you've got a schedule you're considering. Here's what we're thinking people are going to work. What can we expect from performance and fatigue and that? So good for that. You can also take, if you know when somebody slept and was awake and was on duty, you can then get an estimate of, well, if we know those factors, what would their performance have been like? And I believe this is how TSB is still using it. They do a human performance, professional opinion-based analysis, research-based analysis, and then they check their conclusions with FAST. So they never base the conclusions on FAST because of their individual difference limitations. But they know the sleep pattern that the pilot experienced. They push it into FAST and they say, is this saying the same thing that we concluded? And if not, they look at, well, why are the differences here? What's going on? And that's that. So if there are individual differences that cannot be accommodated, you have to really think about the limitation. I got a call about 2 months ago from an operator in the United States with whom I've been doing a little bit of work. And the concern was, we've got a pilot who has called in fatigued, 5 or 6 times in the last month. We've sent them for medicals. They've refused the medicals. They still say they're fatigued. They keep calling in fatigued. And now we want to know, should we fire this person? So what we want to do is take something like FAST, get the pilot to give us their sleep-wake pattern, and then if FAST says you're fatigued, you keep your job. If FAST says you're not fatigued, then you're fired. So, whoa, wait, you can't do that. What FAST says is on average for the average person. The pilot you're dealing with might not be average. So a disciplinary tool, no, can't use it there. As a sole determinant in legal cases or in accident investigations, you have to first of all do a research-based, professional opinion-based analysis and then test it with yourself. And they're not very good at diagnosing sleep disorders either, all you can tell is when a person is asleep and awake. You can't really tell what else is going on during sleep. So as a clinical diagnostic tool, not very good. My four, I still love FAST. I still find it one of the most useful tools, and the combination of FAST still being worked on by Steve, combined with some tools from a company called Fatigue Science in Vancouver, works really well, and I'll show you how that works. Pulsar Informatics, they've got a couple of great systems, all based on an aviation model, but slowly being adapted to trucking, marine, rail, and they're two great packages, Fatigue Meter, Fleet Insight. Their system is all cloud-based, and it's extremely easy to use. It's click, click, click here and there, and you've got an analysis done. A couple of screenshots, you put them in your report, and it's finished. Very fast, very easy to use. Crew Alert is based on Ackerstedt and Folkert's alertness model, model. Very, very strong scientific background, strongly validated, but it is a little confusing to use. When you try it out, if you decide to try out the app and you're thoroughly confused like I was, give me a call and I'll walk you through the steps, because it is a long learning curve. But once you learn how to use it, some excellent performance metrics come out of it. It predicts when you're going to be fatigued. And then FADE, so the Australian package by Fletcher and Drew, or Adam and Drew. They are now pushing what's called FADE Quantum. This is their sort of flagship product now. The original version of FADE, the advantage of FADE over FAST is FADE, you don't need to know anything about the person's sleep pattern. All you need to know about is their duty. So you plug in the duty time, and it says, given this duty pattern, here's where you can expect fatigue to likely occur. Here's how fatigued people will be. Quantum now does have the ability to input a person's sleep-wake pattern. So it's an extra step, extra set of information that makes it even more accurate. So now you can put in, you don't have to put in sleep, but you can put in duty time and sleep if you want to, and get a more accurate prediction of when the person will be fatigued. FADE and FAST will also predict when people will be asleep. So if you put in a duty pattern, you can say, given this duty, set of duties, when is the person most likely to sleep? Both FADE and FAST can do that for you as well. So here's how I bring modeling into an FRMS. One method, one way I do it. And I've done this with aviation, railway, not yet with marine, I've done it with trucking. What we do is, you want to have a prediction of your risk level. So you start off by predicting overall fatigue in whatever group you're looking at. And then you compare your prediction to what's going on for real. And see, is there a difference there? If your predictions are accurate, then you know you're managing risk at whatever level you've determined it to be at. If the difference is large, then you got to go back and say, well, maybe people aren't sleeping anywhere near what the model says, or something else is going on. But explore those differences. Go back in and you try and improve the system and roll it out again. So it's always important to get an estimate of where your risks are, and then confirm whether or not those risks are actually happening, so you know if you're controlling them properly. So here's how I start. I will take a schedule that an organization is considering, put it into, say, FAST, and then I will use FAST to model out the fatigue. Okay, given this work schedule, what is their fatigue going to look like? So this is a schedule from a railway operator. So red is work. You can see that work patterns are all over the place. There's no discernible pattern whatsoever here. So just looking at it, I would anticipate there'd be some fatigue out of it. From there, I then said, okay, FAST, tell me when you think the person would sleep. And this is when FAST predicted the person would sleep, in the blue portions here. So now FAST says, okay, this is when they're going to sleep. Now, what would their fatigue levels be like? And you get a metric or a graph that looks like this with some metrics on it. This is that same 30-day period with performance predicted. This is, in FAST, this is not a fatigue line, a curvilinear fatigue line. It's an estimate of performance, and specifically how well you do on a PDT test. So now I can look at it, and the colors, if you go they're consistent with your work and duty here. So red is work and blue is duty. So now you can look at up here, the thick black line matches up with the red. So this is work. So you can look at, okay, there's a work period that dips a little low here, but look at these ones, they dip really low here. Now you can call those risky duties and explore why are they risky. Fast is interesting because it has embedded in it a comparator to performance on a PVT test if you're drunk. The two cutoffs they put in here are 0.05% right here and 0.08% here. So if your performance drops below this level, it's like you're performing worse than like you would perform with a BAC of 0.05. If it drops below this line, it's like you're legally drunk in Ontario. So people can relate to those comparisons a lot more than just saying, well, they're fatigued at the level of 65%. That, for most of it, that doesn't mean much. But if you can see they're fatigued like they're drunk, then that's a different story, much more easy to understand. Fast, you can change your cutoff line. I typically leave the criterion measure at about 0.05 because you wouldn't want to be operating a car at that level. You probably wouldn't want to be flying a plane or a helicopter or handling a train at that level. So it's a good logical reason for having it behind it. So you predict out the overall performance based on the sleep-wake pattern. And then what you can do is go in a little closer and say, well, now we've got, say, 10 out of these 28 duties that fell below the criterion level. You've got 10 risky duties. You can then look at, well, why does FAST say that these duties are risky? And say, well, that particular duty we're looking at, the person's performance would be low because they were fatigued due to recent sleep. So there's TSB and my acute sleep disruption risk factor. Chronic sleep debt or chronic sleep disruption. They were also awake for a long time, so there's your continuous wakefulness risk factor. And time of day, so they were performing during the post-lunch dip or the circadian trough. And then you can compile those numbers and say, well, we've now got 10 risky duties. They were all risky because at the end of the duty, people were up for 22 hours. Now we know what the solution is. Try and change your duties around or something before duty so people don't have to be up that long. This is the prediction, remember, of where FAST thinks things would go, given that schedule. And you can get some pretty interesting performance metrics out of FAST as well. You can see percentage of time for each duty spent below the criterion. So you can see the shift I looked at with that little dashboard pop out. 100% of that duty was below the criterion level of 0.05. So 100% of the time that pilot would have been flying like they had a blood alcohol level of 0.08. Now, if the duty is only 5 minutes, okay. But if you look at this duty, it was 480 minutes. So for 480 minutes, the whole flight time, they were at a pretty elevated level of risk. Next, compare what's going on in reality. So the way I do this is I collect data from 3 different sources. Okay, knowing that there are inaccuracies embedded within the modeling, I like to make my predictions or my estimates of fatigue from what's going on in reality a little bit more accurate. So I will collect information from hard copy sleep-wake journals. So I hand out journals to all the pilots. They record when they're awake, when they're asleep, when they're on duty. I get them to do inputs or measurements of their sleepiness at various times during the day. The Epworth sleepiness scale that I had you do, the limitation of it is it's an average measure. Remember how I framed it? I said, in this situation, how would you feel across the last month or so? Good overall indicator of fatigue. The Karolinska sleepiness is a measurement of fatigue at a point in time. So I will get my pilots to fill out the KSS just before duty. Right? They fatigue just before they crawl into that cockpit. I will get them to fill it out at just before top of descent. How are they doing just before that critical phase? And then after they've locked up the wheels, then record your fatigue. How are you feeling there? So a pretty good measure of fatigue in a point in time. I will then collect, at the same time I'm collecting all this data, I will also collect actigraphy. Actigraphy is a very basic measurement that you can get a sleep-wake pattern out of. It's essentially moving system assumes you're awake, you're not moving, it assumes you're asleep. So where's the limitation there? You're in a boring meeting, you're not moving around. They could see it as being sleep. So that's why you also need a measurement of what is actually going on through a written record of it as well. So you can validate those sleep periods. I would then, and this is just an example of some of the data I collect from in my sleep journal. So what time you woke up, and remember in the TSB's approach, they look at what time you went to bed, but also how long you fell asleep. So how long did you fall asleep right here? When did you wake up? What time was the last time you got out of bed? How many awakenings you've had? Pretty good predictors of fatigue. And then some important information about your duty. What time did you start duty? What time did you finish? What were your KSS scores at various times during the duty? This is just a slide showing the KSS. So this is the measurement of fatigue at a point in time. The instructions are, choose the best response here that describes how you're feeling right now. So you can see. So I'm feeling pretty alert. So the ready band, this is what actigraphy data looks like. This is 1 24-hour period. Movement is registered here, increased electrical signal. No movement, and it assumes sleep is going on. If you know a person's sleep-wake pattern, again, you can predict what their performance is going to be like. So the ready band system has Steve Hirsch's mathematical model built into it. So based on the sleep pattern, it's predicting this level of performance across that 24-hour period. And the colors are associated with those 0.05, 0.08 cutoffs. It's consistent with his model. I'll then consolidate all three sources of data to get what I think is a pretty accurate depiction of the person's sleep-wake history. And then I'll compare what's actually going on to what I predicted. See if there's differences there. And you're pulling up again. You've still got one duty with a fair amount of time under the criteria, so prediction was accurate in this case. If there isn't a difference, then you go back and look at it. Is there something we can do to change the schedule around, or do we decide to accept the estimate of the actual prediction of fatigue versus what was going on? Because maybe we've got a better picture of what's going on with sleep-wake patterns now. If you accept the fatigue, then can you introduce some sort of countermeasure strategy? Can we get the pilots to do something just before they plan an approach to fight any fatigue they might be experiencing? So what changes you would use? So my favorite combination is the one I just described, using ready band and fast. So the reasons for it, very first reason is because it feels good to play with the big guys. All sorts of very progressive sports teams are using the ready band to look at how can we improve our players' performance. Chicago Cubs won the World Series last year, and they were all using ready bands. They were looking at, okay, here's our game schedule, here's where we think people are going to sleep, here's our level of risk, now what can we do ahead of time to reduce that risk? And this contributed to their win. So it feels pretty good to be playing at that level. But the other three reasons are, the ready band system can provide individuals, so the individual user can get an app on their phone that gives them all of their data based on the sleep-wake pattern that the actigraphy unit is measuring. So now the pilot, operator, trained driver can look at their performance curve and say, okay, right now I'm feeling pretty good, but when I take that duty, I'm going to be even lower. So can I do something in between now and when I take my duty, start my duty 8 hours from now? Can I take a nap? Can, if we've got a progressive FRMS, can I call in fatigue 8 hours and they can sub a different pilot? Now, you might think that a pilot could go out and purchase a system like this on their own. These systems are not available commercially. So it's usually an organization that purchases it. If an organization is purchasing it, you're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on it. Wouldn't you want to have that data too? So up until about a month ago, there was a limitation. And the limitation was the organization can tap into individual user data and look at, our pilot here, Cliff, he's fatigued all the time now. If you don't have a progressive organization that doesn't understand fatigue well, The action here might be, well, we're going to get rid of Cliff. Cliff is out of a job. If you have a better organization, you're going to look at, well, why is poor Cliff fatigued all the time? Are we saddling him with some nasty duties? Has he got a sleep disorder that our fatigue software can't predict? The newer combination, or the newer version of this system, has a variety of data observation or data permissions. So as a company, you can decide, you want to watch all of our operators, in which case you get a dashboard that looks like this. It's got all sorts of other neat ways of looking at it. Or do we want to just provide it at the individual level and teach them how to manage their fatigue and sleep differently based on the data they can get from their ready bed? Or can we not get anything? What they can do is they can de-identify all of this information, and you get a snapshot as how are all of our pilots doing as a whole. So it's aggregate or consolidated data. The other version they can do too is nobody gets any data. So operator doesn't see anything, pilots don't see anything, but somebody like myself sees it all. Person working on a research project with them. So a variety of different permissions, so it gets away from that big brother watching effect. The fourth reason I really love this combination is because everything is built around Steve Hirsch's model, his safety model, S-A-F-T-E. It all plays well together. So the ready band system, you can collect data with this ready band system, and then you can export it back into the various versions of FAST and study it to your heart's content. You can pick out all of the fatigue risk factors in there. You can get the metrics around how many duties are considered risky and to what extent they're risky. So it's a really great system when you purchase it as a whole and use it as a whole. If you want to explore how to use this modeling, I've got a pretty good relationship with all four of those companies. Don't spend your money on a trial or a license. Talk to me and you can sort of sponge off my license and give you a better idea of which one might better meet your needs, and it's, you know, to spend thousands on getting a license right away. What I'd like to do now, how much time do we have? Good time? Okay. So what I'd like to do now is show you how FAST works. So I've got a schedule that was donated to me. What I'd like you to do is look at it. I'll walk you through the process, and you'll see how easy it is. But when you first look at it, think about what can we do differently with this schedule to reduce fatigue and overwork. Okay, so what I have done here is I have inputted, so this is a newer version of FAST, it's blue and black instead. What I have done is I have inputted the duty times. Duty times are black. And then I have allowed FAST to predict, based on this duty time, tell us when you think they're going to sleep. Based on that prediction of sleep and given known wakefulness, this is what we could expect from this one particular pilot's performance. Here's our cutoffs, 0.05 here, 0.08 here. You can see some pretty significant drops, mostly at the end of the duties. So now we can go back and we can look at, okay, let's pick, for example, what looks like possibly one of the trickiest ones right here. And we can pull up the little dashboard that tells us why performance would be low and what fatigue risk factors are at play. So in this particular, at the end of this particular duty, it ends at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:15. Performance would be really low, 41% effectiveness. So if you gave them a PVT test, they would respond very slowly and inaccurately. In fact, performance reaction time would be 241% longer than a normally rested person. Their lapse index would be 10 times higher than normally rested. A lapse index is an indication of a lapse in attention due to a microsleep. So they've missed a signal, they've missed an alerter because they've gone unconscious essentially for a few seconds. So this particular person would have been fatigued, according to FAST, at 7 o'clock in the morning because out of phase, their circadian rhythms were disrupted because they were on duty during the circadian trough. FAST changes the circadian trough, prediction of when that person's trough would be, depending on when they're sleeping. So given this person's sleep-wake pattern, this person's trough would not have started around 10, 11 o'clock at night, like it would for everybody here who's working essentially 9 to 5 and sleeping at night. For this particular person, it would have started closer to 2:30 in the morning. And then finishing around 6 o'clock in the morning. So you've got this profile of risk factors. Now you can go back and adjust the pattern. So one of the things I'm thinking of is, well, FAST is predicting that so I should preface here that one horizontal line is one 24-hour period, starting at and going all the way up to 23:59 over here. So they've got a block of night duties here, and FAST is predicting that the person would essentially finish duty and be asleep an hour later. But what if you gave them some strategies and said, well, why don't you kind of preserve some of your fatigue and take a nap just before duty? So let's see if we remove some sleep here and we reposition some sleep to just before these duties. And you saw there, if we go, I'll show you again. So sleep, there's your sleep environment. So it affects the quality of the sleep if you say the person's sleeping in a poor bunkhouse. So I've changed the sleep pattern a little bit, kind of made it polyphasic. And now we go back to the beginning duties here. And we see some of them are a little higher. So we haven't fixed the problem totally. We probably removed the continuous wakefulness risk factor, but not some of the others. Remember, over here we saw 4 risk factors at play. If we look at some of these duties, they've got 3 risk factors at play. So we have to do something else to address the remaining 3 risk factors to reduce that. So that's in a nutshell how FAST works. You've got some great performance metrics you can pull out of it. I showed you on some of the other screens, but you can look at across each duty period, percentage of time spent below a criterion level. If you get in even deeper, you can actually look at 15-second chunks of time to see what's going on within those time frames. Some pretty good resolution on it. We've got a bit of time left for questions. Any questions about modeling or fatigue in general, or my approach to bringing modeling into FRMS? I'm going to stick around for a little bit. I do have to unfortunately scoot out halfway through our discussion session a little later on. I've got to get back to do some work with TC, but that's where we're at.
Thank you very much, Linda.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey guys, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll be back at 12:35.
I'll join the ACAT.
1:35.